Next is the panel discussion, and moderating that will be Rick Tumlinson. Where is Rick? And our panel members are our speakers, and in addition, we're going to have Dr. Gaubatz as part of our panel. And Dr. Gaubatz has spoken here before. In case you don't know who he is, he's a director, program manager for the Single Stage to Orbit program at McDonnell Douglas. And so we'd like to call our panel members up and our moderator.
Mostly I jotted down the thought. I think it ties into what we've heard this morning of our situation. That goes along the line of what if our air transportation was as restricted today as our space transportation. You might be hearing from somebody go something like this, that I'm Joe Dokes from the air side of the National Ground and Air Agency, NGA. Appreciate the opportunity to be here to report on another exciting year of operations in manned air. Some of you may have heard a more technical report that I gave at the American Institute of Terrestrial Transportation, the AITT, in Erie last week, and today will just be the highlights. First, the accomplishments. NGA completed another accident-free year, carrying out 9 perfect flights. 2 of the flights only carried the 3 aeronauts, but all the others had mission specialists on board, carry out scientific experiments, and learn more about traveling through air. All flights took off from our flight pad in Buffalo, where they flew the length of Lake Erie before dumping their extra engines and gas tank in the lake. Then the aeronauts, the ship and cargo continued to wing westward with its main engines gaining altitude, flying as far as Denver until heading south, we landed in Albuquerque. Here they were met by a recovery crew who, after only 2 or 3 days max, loaded the manned aircraft back onto the truck for a trip back to Buffalo for stacking up for the next flight. Some of you may have been privileged to watch a landing or to actually hear one of the aeronauts speak of their great experience of flying. Who can forget the fun of watching them try to drink coffee while flying through turbulent air? Or thrill as we watched our school children watch the temperature plummet down when they held a thermometer outside. We at NGA hope that someday we can make flying safe enough even for everyone in this room to try it, at least once. But first we must work on bringing the cost down per flight. We have been challenged by our director to cut the operations cost. We have now reduced it to only 9 or 10,000 people involved in our flight and recovery operation. And we now get 2 flights out of our main engine before repairing them. We're trying to get funding to make the engines we throw away cheaper and to reduce the number of people by at least 20%. But I need to get your support for a serious problem. How can we at NGA get more public support for manned air and our entire air program? Every year it's the same old struggle in Congress to get funding to keep our air program going. The ground side of the agency certainly has an easier task. Of course they have all those commercial applications and they get help from DOT and DOC. I'm thinking about having a couple of the truck and rail companies do maybe a $5 million study to determine if there's any commercial interest in there. Some darn fools think that if you just make it as cheap and safe as train travel, a new transportation market might open. Some guy came in the other day even talking about he might be able to make money hauling packages between cities overnight. Wow. What next? Flights across the ocean? But I don't know for sure if a market would really open, so we had better do another study and decide what the right kind of plane is that we need, and the technology there is there to develop it. But speaking of technology, we do have a lot of spin-offs from our air program. You know, all those aluminum pots and pans you use, direct results of our aluminum propeller research. And well, I'd like to go on, but my time's nearly up. Remember, it's about time to plan for next year's budget cycle, and we need your calls to your congressman to support our air and manned air program. If you do, I'm almost certain that in 20, 30 years, you too can be flying, and flights between Huntsville and Atlanta will be as common as a bus ride to Memphis.
Rick, where are you? Let me add a micro bit. I'm suddenly reminded, you said pots and pans. In HUD, we used to call spin-off trickle down. That is, if the federal government would only support housing for millionaires, in 40 or 50 years, the housing would be in such shape that the poor people could afford it. And I had a man on a committee over at the NASA committee one time, an agronomist. He used to call himself a farmer. He was one of the outstanding farmers in the country, in R&D. And he said, oh, spin-off, trickle down. You know what we call that in farming? What? If you want to feed the sparrows, feed the horses.
Oh, sorry, I missed some of the questions. I got stuck in a little multitasking situation. Okay, so we're starting the questions now.
Yes, sir.
Questions? Okay, sir.
Okay.
Oh, and please direct it to whoever.
Well, anyone wants to answer. I haven't, in all the years I've been attending these conferences, I don't think I've seen a greater divergence between what the NSS members believe and what's coming out of NASA. And yet a lot of us feel that we can't allow programs like the space station to just be canceled because that'll block, sort of derail manned space entirely. So what do we do?
Thank you, Brad. I know what to do. First of all, it should be recalled that I directed a congressional study on space station, which said the following 3 things over some 200 pages. An objective case has been made for having some of our people permanently upgraded. Second, there are a hell of a lot of different ways of building a space station. For God's sake, use your head. Third, $8 billion will turn out to be more before we see it. I'll stand by that. So let's put aside. Here's what you do. And I'm fortunately there are just the two of us in the room, and your place to protect my privacy. There's going to become a piece of paper out of the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers when the committee is whether long enough NASA, it's not the only one that isn't teaching jurisdiction report. It says we must have a structural change in the space station program. There is nothing you can do beyond what's going on now in designing the space station. We have all kinds of engineers in the space industry and NASA working on cathodes, of course, capabilities. George Brown is quoted as saying, in Space News, the current issue, it's not an engineering problem, it's a political problem. That's correct. Here's what you do. You effect a structural change in the program to address the fundamental question that none of this activity can deal with. It's the question of value. Value. You'll be asking the American public, and I don't know whether the president will invest the capital that he will have to, I simply don't know, to address the question, is what we're going to get out of the space station program worth what we're going to have to pay for? That is the zero-order question. And here's what you do. You immediately start a phase 2 to the space station program. Just make an assumption that something is going to be up there somehow, sometime. Phase 2 sees the friendly federal government, not just Congress, the White House, the OMB, Jack Gibbons, Space Mountain, everybody, that we now are going to start phase 2 of the space station program. We are going to draw upon all of our knowledge, all of our experience, all of our assets, Skylab, Space Lab, Shuttle, Freedom, and push to see that within a decade or so, we have at least 100 people in LEO. All these people will be private citizens. All of these people will be residing and working in private facilities. They will all be privately financed. And the role of the government will be to do everything we possibly can do to encourage the private sector to see that come about. That is phase 2 of the Freedom Program. Now, I personally, I'm not going to talk about this, I know exactly what I want to do up there, that's the first thing, but you figure it out. There is now a law, 1993 Authorization Act, that says that the government can act as an anchor tenant, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. No money need be put in by the federal government. But it would act as an anchor tenant, the private sector can then go to Wall Street and have a check sometime. So anyway, that's what you do about the space station. And that is the classical role of the government in the United States. You know, it sends the troops out west to find out which way the rivers are flowing. You map the territory, you kill the Indians, and then you say, go to it. Oh, thank you very much, Brad.
So much for that politically correct answer.
It was something that just more, just a suggestion to yourself on some of your future rhetoric. Something if you sort of go around to, I think fits in with what you were trying to say. Tom partially stole my thunder in what I was going to say, but there's the word program, which we all use. Now, program is a word that basically can be called socialist dialectic. It has certain implications that go with it. I think it's a word that we should try to wipe out of our vocabularies when talking about space, because it invariably makes people the assumption that there is a program, that there is a policy, that there is not. I mean, there was no Western program. The British did not have an American program. We don't need any program at all.
I actually agree with you, and slap my own hand for using the phrase. When I was reconstructing my speech this morning, I was pulling things from a concept proposal I have called the New American Space Agenda, all puns intended. And the idea there is to replace the idea of a program with an agenda. And I was pulling some of the snippets from that without the reputations that followed to put it in there. So I apologize for using the word program. You and Tom are absolutely correct. No problem at all there. Any more questions? Yes, sir, in the back of the room.
Yes, I've been noticing that some of the...
Please address it to the speaker.
Sure, well, whomever, gentleman in the blue suit possibly? I forget names, I'm bad about that, sorry. I noticed that pharmaceutical companies seem to have the most visible interest in space applications in zero-G, and I suppose that probably has something to do with miscibility of liquids at certain temperatures and pressures, and in zero-G they'll say mixed, under whatever process they're doing, and whatever. But now these people are apparently burdened down with a great deal of money and would love to have access to the kind of thing you were talking about in low Earth orbit. Now, if it were there, you think that they might be able to help with the impetus to develop the necessary transportation to make regular trips to this sort of thing feasible?
As somebody who's messed with that field for Emmett, I'm going to pass that over to Mr. Lichtenberg. He's fought those battles too.
Okay. I'll try and jump in that a little bit, and just a little background so we have a common playing ground here, level playing ground maybe. Back in 1986, when the Challenger blew up, we being Payload Systems company I started back in 1984, we're in the process of trying to work with scientists to do experiments in space to get through all the bureaucracy and things and try to help science and engineering up there. So we looked at the only space activities going on, I don't use the word program anymore, The only space activities that were going on where we could do things was the Soviet Mir space station. And it had just gone up, and it was going to have this ability, like our Space Station Freedom has the ability, to do continuous long-term experiments. So we thought about it a few months and came to the conclusion that protein crystal growth, and that's really what pharmaceutical companies are into, is crystallizing proteins. And what they want to do then is bring these proteins into the laboratory, take X-ray pictures of them, get a three-dimensional X-ray picture, and then the computers can take that data and come up with a three-dimensional structure of the protein in a very simplified manner. So we said, well, here's a really good commercial product because it doesn't weigh very much, it doesn't take much power, it doesn't take much crew time, it doesn't take much resources except for being in space in the zero-G or microgravity environment. So we went around to pharmaceutical companies, thought that, like you, that this would be a really good place to get some funding. They'd surely be willing to kick in, a couple of $1 million a year out of their research budgets, which I'm not sure how much they are, but it's in the hundreds of millions through the pharmaceutical groups. And it's funny because the answer we got from everybody in the United States was, well, yeah, we're involved in that stuff. We're involved in this Center for Commercial Development of Space, and we've got $25,000 investment in there per year. And yeah, well, NASA's not doing anything now, so we're not really too concerned about it. It'll be a couple of years before they fly again, and so it's kind of discouraging because what they said was, we don't really know yet. It's Tom's law of the dangerous precedents. This hasn't been done before, and we're not really sure that it's got a lot of applicability to what we're doing. We'll continue to spend our millions a year in our laboratories doing trial and error. We'll do 5, 10, 20,000 different kinds of slightly modified chemicals for drugs and take a look at it because we know what our return is on that. We know how many particular chemicals we have to try to get one hit. We have an idea of how much we can charge for these things. So we're not really interested in putting a lot of money into a program that nobody's ever done anything with before. So it was kind of discouraging. Things are picking up a little bit now, but way back in 1987, we had the ability that the space station, the U.S. space activities still don't have, which is to do months at a time of protein crystal growth in orbit. So long answer to your question, but one would be hopeful. But as Peter said, these companies are very, very tight with their money, and if they as Rick mentioned, if you perceive that you're poor, then you're not really willing to go out and do some things. So it's hard to break that money free.
Oh, well, let me add to that. Let me draw a slightly different picture. You get the facility up there, not necessarily federal government, privately, Bob Truax with something bigger that doesn't blow up, whatever, and it's there, and you hang out a space available sign and open an office, space for rent. Would that change their view?
We've already got that. Our company with Mir can go up there, and we're doing that now. We did 2 missions. We've got another mission coming up in the fall. I haven't seen it change their view yet, and I think as somebody said the other day, you really won't see...
You mean Russia still has a space program?
Not a program, activity.
My point is, though, the pharmaceutical company probably isn't that sure of how long that program's going to last either.
Well, I'll tell you, the Russians, as long as you're willing to pay them dollars, they'll fly their space stations. If you got the money to rent it, they'll keep doing it.
Ah, true capitalists.
Next, yes, sir.
Peter, addressed to you.
Yes.
One thing I did kind of expect to hear was maybe a little more information aside from SSTO, which we're all eager to hear about. Other vehicles that are reducing launch costs. Any comments?
Well, if I look out there around the world, there are, I would guess, somewhere in the order of 20 to 50 launch vehicles under development, everywhere from back-of-the-envelope calculations of companies to solid programs going on. What makes SSTO different is, quite frankly, as a program, it's crystallized and doing something about it. And it's the realest, if I can use that as a term, most real of all of the programs to date that is making a substantial revolutionary change. There have been revolutionary programs proposed, but they've all stopped at the view graph stage. None of them have gone to hardware. And using that as an entry, let me point out something which I consider fundamental about the way SDIO has done this program, which is the magic of it. Keep on asking myself the question, what was different in the Apollo days as compared to now, that programs in the Apollo days actually were funded and continue to get funding throughout, and now Station is sort of constantly on the verge of being canceled. And the difference is that during the Apollo era, it was done in staged implementations. There was always something flying every 6 months, every year. You didn't have a program that was planned in 1961 that said, by 1969 we're going to the moon, and they spent 9 years designing one vehicle that was going to go and fly to the moon. They did Mercury and Gemini, Apollo 8, Apollo 10, and so forth. And SSTO is different from other programs in just that way. DCX is one of the many stages to get single-stage to orbit. So that's why it's become the focus of my attention as well, as different from other programs. Quite frankly, when it comes down to it, I'm a capitalist and I'll use whatever lowest cost vehicle there's out there. I'll weigh a little bit on reliability, but I'll take risk for low cost. And I'll support whoever's going to fly me the cheapest and fastest.
I'd like to get into a couple of things. First of all, Dr. Gaubatz, I know the program, again, to stay practical and sharp the way it's been, has gone through a change from going from full 1/3 to full scale. There were some political considerations in it. Can you explain that rationale a little bit to us? I know you're going to do this tomorrow, but very briefly, what's...
Okay, I'll leap in on that. Let me go back and cover a couple of points on activity or program. One, to talk about government involvement. I think we have a case in this program where the government is doing things right. And the major sponsor who's sitting over here represents SDIO and now the DMDO program office. And what I think is really a pilot program and perhaps a return to the way things were once done, where you can talk truly about integrated government industry teams of each side doing the thing that they do best and working it together as a team focused on a product. And it works, and it worked very well. We have been able to go from a contract award to now hardware that's out in the static testing in less than a 2-year time period, and at a very low cost. And so the government can, and in this case is doing things right, and it's a model that as a competitive nation, I think needs to be implemented for those programs where the government does have a unique role to perform. And I think transportation and space transportation viewed as very fundamental infrastructure that needs to be put into place to open this frontier called space. Historically and reasonably is a function that the government needs to play a strong role in, and I think this is a model program for doing that. Also like to comment on the thought of SSTO, revolutionary technology, and it's been categorized in both DoD and NASA studies as quote leapfrog technology options. In my mind, what it really is leapfrog cultural change. Because we're not evoking any new technology that hasn't already been used in the automobile industry, sporting industry, aviation, aerospace. It's bringing those together in a new cultural outlook on how business needs to be done. And as all the speakers pointed out this morning, you need to focus first and absolute on reducing the cost of getting to and from orbit. And if you can't do that, then things fix, because you're coming up with the wrong solution. And that solution lies more in the nature of how we do business than the specifics of the technologies involved, which allow us to do business differently. technologies to do that are in place, and what needs is that dramatic mindset change to allow that to happen. And that's specifically why we're out at White Sands doing our testing. It's a totally new cultural environment. It's literally not only a clean sheet design, it's a clean ground design all the way up. Those of you who maybe have visited out there appreciate the starkness of the area, but certainly not a starkness in being receptive to cultural changes. And that's been one of the marvelous experience in working with people at New Mexico and at White Sands, and their willingness to dramatically change how we do business. And that's a long measure, go to a long measure towards our success. Whether that's done with an SSTO or TSTO, or the vertical takeoff, vertical lander, vertical takeoff, horizontal lander, horizontal takeoff, horizontal lander, or what's the other combination? Horizontal takeoff, vertical lander. Take your pick. As long as that is done within the context of a new fundamental change in how we operate, how we maintain, reducing the total infrastructure that needs to be in place to support it, the costs are going to come down. And, we feel very privileged as a company, as a team, to be able to put together the hardware to demonstrate that. There's no other way to get that without building hardware and understanding.
The question about the
I forgot the question I was asked.
modification of the program for political realities, tying into what Peter was saying about showing a vehicle every 2 years, Mercury, Gemini, etc.
Yeah, there's certainly a political reality to it, because building smaller vehicles can cost less money. In this case, it has, and certainly in a political environment of enormous changes. It's not having to do with this particular administration. It's an environment this administration, as the last one, inherited, and we're all living in. It is one of change, whether we like it or not. And part of that is the reality of reassessing how we spend our money, and consequently what money is available, and not much is available. So we need to focus on programs that will bring you along the path towards our goal of the low-cost space transportation, but one that's also that's affordable, and one that is also demonstrable. And I agree with the comment that waiting for 9 years for something to come out and finally fly or not fly is just saps the patience of the public, and in addition to being pathetic. In addition, there is a real cost benefit to learning as you go. Having completed our design and now flying, getting into the flying and the operation of the vehicle, we as a team are just one heck of a lot smarter about taking the next step. And I'm certain that having completed the next step, we're going to be one heck of a lot smarter about taking that next step. And that will get reflected in the efficiency of your program, less cost uncertainties, less likelihood of ending up with missed weights and payload capabilities, and probably equally or maybe more importantly, missed goals on development costs and missed goals on operational costs. So it turns out that it's not only politically an astute thing to do, programmatically and technically, it has a lot of real merit.
Could I just jump in and say one thing? Because that's the same problem that we really haven't talked about NASP at all today, and National Aerospace Plane. And to me, that's one of the big problems that the National Aerospace Plane, which is now the National Aerospace Program, in case you haven't heard. Not build a plane where they just run a program. that goal was to do horizontal takeoff, single stage to orbit, and as soon as they started backing off saying, well, maybe we're only going to a hypersonic research vehicle, maybe in a Mach 20 or 22 or 23, everybody thought it failed, that was wrong, and it seems to me that the whole program should have been set up in this incremental approach, which is to go high hypersonic first and keep pushing it until you get there or find a way to go about it. So it seems to make a lot of sense.
Part of the point I think I was trying to get to with Mr. Gaubatz is that if I understand correctly, and correct me on this, but if I understand this, is that the next phase of the DCX will be DCX2. And rather than waiting 8 years to go to full scale, DCX2 is going to be cranked out in 2 or 3 years, if I understand correctly. Which works beautifully for the representatives in Congress who are elected for 2-year terms. They can see the term while they're still in. I think we have a comment from the
Well, I want to make one comment, and that is, and I work in the program office up in BMGO. In fact, I am the program office. Very cool. And by the way, other programs have been run this way with a small cadre. The SR-71 was built that way. The YF-16 was built that way. Some of the most successful programs in history have been built with a very small government team. There's nothing wrong with that. It means that you are trusting the contractor to do the job and not coming in and telling him how to build and design something. And it works. The point I wanted to make, though, was the DCX2 is the McDonnell entry. There are other concepts, and someone asked this question earlier, for low-cost access to space. And one of the concepts that's really superb is one out of Lockheed, Skunk Works. Another concept that Rockwell has. General Dynamics and Boeing both have two-stage concepts and some single-stage concepts. The fundamental issues are all the same. And what we call that vehicle in the government, because any kind of a next step will be a competitive procurement. And if I had my druthers, I'd do a fly-off of several alternative concepts, would be an SX-2, Space Plane Experimental 2. And it's not an orbital vehicle. It won't prove everything any more than the DCX proved everything associated with SSPO. But it'll address 3 fundamental issues. Aircraft-like cost, cost per flight. Aircraft-like reliability. What is the reliability numbers? When you get done, you'll have real numbers for both of those, which are just plain UGRAPH, blue sky functions right now as to what you can get to. And the last issue it'll address is this issue of mass fraction. Can I really make the vehicle lightweight enough so that I can do an SSTO vehicle? Well, whether I can or cannot, and I firmly believe you can, anyone who sits down and really looks at the physics of the problem, whether you can or cannot, you will demonstrate the ability to build either one-stage or two-stage vehicles, and we will know how to go out and operate things with aircraft-like access. So my own view is the next step, McDonnell's DCX2 or our SX2, is a good way to take that incremental step, and I totally endorse everything that Bill said. There's a series of incremental steps. You cannot believe how large our cost models, if you crank them today, would predict, I'm talking about the government versions of cost models, would predict what an SSTO or any kind of a space system is going to cost. Billions upon billions of dollars. And when you really get into those models, you got uncertainty factors, you've got scrappage rate factors, you've got management factors, you've got factors on top of factors on top of factors. And the facts are you don't know exactly what it's going to cost, but there's one thing for sure. If your model predicts $2 billion, it will cost at least $2 billion. What you need to do is take these stepping stones, one step at a time, and my boss, Colonel Ward, is his forte. He loves to do these kind of programs. Take these things one step at a time, get the data you need to take the next step, and then go into the next step. So anyway, that's all I wanted to say. There are other concepts out there, a variety of concepts for low-cost space access. I was personally involved in the selection of the McDonnell DCX concept, and I think it's a great concept for what it's proving. But there's other concepts out there too. Thank you. Oh, sorry. Did you want to say something?
Did you want to say something, Dr. Gaubatz? No, I was going to ask both the officer and Dr. Gaubatz perhaps to comment on this. Most of us are looking forward sometime this summer to witnessing by television or whatever other magic a test flights, which I presume are insured for stage 1, to show DCX is capable of doing the things that they want it to be capable of doing. The next step after that is the really critical one, and that's something that a lot of us are very interested in and want to support. And I'm wondering what the current situation is with respect to funding for that next step. What project office is going to be administering that funding, and is that something that's going in the next budget request, or is that something we're going to wait a year before the budget request goes in? And if there's anything we can do to help support that project, that process.
Defer to the program office.
Oh, I don't want to steal your call center. I want to get out, okay? But just real briefly, there is no program next year right now, okay? There's a strong congressional push to put money into the budget, and that may succeed. There's a lot of interest at Air Force Base Command and other using commands within the Air Force in these kinds of concepts. There's a lot of interest within this administration in what we call advanced technology demonstrators with dual use applications, and this kind of a step certainly fits in that profile. So everything is there to make this thing happen. A successful DCX flight test program may bring that political consensus together, or it may not, to take that next step. We hope that it will, and that's our goal and objective. I will also point out, though, that anytime you build and fly hardware, you run the risk of failure. And we didn't design this thing with a 99.99% chance of success. We designed it with probably a 90% chance of pulling off all the objectives we want to demonstrate. It's one of the ways we got the cost down. If it fails, that doesn't mean the concept is wrong. The issues are still low cost and reliable space access. We just need to go back and work some of the other approaches and continue to work the technology base to get there. I think it's going to work, and I think it's going to work great. That would be my suggestion, is watch and see what happens this summer, and any help you can give us, we'd appreciate it. Bill?
Sir. Oh, sorry, Bill. Did you want something? No, if I could reiterate what Justin said. And the fact is that there is no significant money in next year's budget to continue this. If a good tooth fairy came by and said, what would you like? We'd say, gee, we'd like to keep the program going in the present organization that has a demonstrated track record of running fast-paced programs. Put the money in Congress, bump up the budget for this coming year, and 3 years, we'll have your next element of demonstration flights going, and at another decision point as to whether to go proceed on to a full-scale operational system. Again, Congress represents the public, and in spite of what we might think at times, they are our representatives, and they do react to what their constituents say is important to them. And it is very obvious that a lot of constituents are not saying space is terribly important. Obviously, it's important to all of us, or we wouldn't be in the room. But obviously, we're not representing the majority of the people they're hearing from. And I think there's an education process that needs to go to our representatives for them to understand that space is more than just a hobby. Space can be serious business. And like any other frontier in the world that's been open, it's always resulted in enormous new wealth generation, and with that jobs and opportunities. And I think part of that perspective needs to go into that, along with what you also heard from people this morning, that the whole idea of a space frontier is a myth until you can get there and back at costs that make it economically viable. And there are hearings going on now, and the markup process is proceeding. First in the House on the Armed Services Committee under Representative Bertha. And any information desired that can get into that office, would help the process in getting a funding increase into the succeeding year budget.
I'll add a little to that too. I do do still believe that, frankly, heck, if you'd ask the average European, how important is it that we go to the New World, they'd probably say, well, some bread disappointed. Go kill that king over there. Not really interested in travel. But once that group that understood the possibilities did something about it, and I don't just mean the social side, the side that organizations like this work on, but the individuals working on the hardware, doing the companies, did something about it, then it's a chicken and egg situation, and we have to break out of it instead of lamenting the chicken and egg situation. And so, in fact, I have a T-shirt that I think I will propose for you guys. I see a whole silhouetted line of people of all different shapes and sizes standing there, and right above it says SSTO, build it and they will go. If we were $50 a pound to go to orbit, we wouldn't be having this discussion. We'd be getting out of the way. People would try to get there. Next, yes, sir.
Just one observation and question on this. What I see, the next step as far as space exploration is going to be up to individual businesses. Now, before you can get a business interest or an investor's interest, you have to have something down here, a specific proposal. Now, what I would like to know is if you have an idea, what is the best way to prepare a specific proposal in a way that, like, say, you show it to a business person that would be interested, especially when you have proper corporations. I mean, they may not have something that goes along with their own research program, but they might be interested in something to make that money. But I think you have to have down on paper specific. And basically, I'm interested in finding out how or what type of thing to look for down on paper specifically. Get business interested.
Well, first of all, I commend you because I think you're on the right track. You're taking an action. I'll tell you one thing. When I, after a few years in the space actors, when we got involved in an actual entrepreneurial firm, whether we succeed or not, my whole attitude changed. And I feel a lot better about it in our hands. So you're on the right track. One of the two business gentlemen here like to take a shot?
I was thinking, I like to do a show before. It seemed like a very proposal type of thing. That you have a business interest.
I teach an hour-and-a-half lecture at International Space University. I'm starting a space company. I'm trying to condense that down, but all companies are basically the same, whether it's space or a restaurant. You have to pull together a few basic points. One is, what is the product or service you're providing? Clearly described. Second is, what is the market that's there for that? Improve the marketplace, and that's always been the biggest problem in space. You can't improve the marketplace. Third is, how much money do you need to develop? That's just, I can jot these down for you later if you want. Fourth is, who are the people? Probably the single most important thing in any business plan is the people expertise. And then fifth and most important to investors, how much money can they make? I have a truism that I've learned. There are three things that allow anything to happen: people, technology, and money. If you've got those three things, the right technology, the right amount of money, the right people, and you can make anything within the laws of physics happen. When it comes down to it, if you have the right people and the right technology, you can attract the money. Yeah, let me finish this 1 second. The right people and the right technology attract the money. If you have the right people and the right amount of money, you can create the technology as it's being done. But if you have the technology and money, not the right people, you've got useless matter. So when it comes down to it, in any project at all, the first thing I tell folks is make sure you've got the right people there with the expertise, the technology, the finance, and the enthusiasm, and then everything else flows from that.
So basically, today, people and technology, not the people and the technology. So you have to present it in a way to business part of money.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, in space right now, we might have the people who don't have the technology. We're trying to develop the technology here, and the money will come.
I'll add something to what Peter says there, and that is, in fact, agreeing with what he said. It doesn't matter if it's space or a restaurant or whatever. The bottom line is your investors want a profit. You can walk in, you can be starry-eyed. In Lunacorp, we tried a few of these things, got in there, got them psyched up, got them starry-eyed. They were interested. It was too expensive. they couldn't make a profit, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, you've got to, space isn't different. You've got to get to zero heads as far as business goes. You know, a dollar is a dollar, it's a dollar. You know, and you've got to play by the same rules you play here and show the same sort of profits, the same sort of thing. What we did in Lunacorp was we backed off and decided to get some terrestrial revenue streams. And now we're producing CD-ROMs, things like that, interactive CDs, so that we can fund ourselves and move one step up the line. Peter's doing some of the same thing, retrenching, going into other angles, and showing a problem. So what you do is you massage your business plan. Maybe you get turned down at first, but you find out what the mistakes were, the problems there, change those, come back in again. Keep trying. Don't ever give up.
As you say, you have to have the money to develop these ideas, so maybe you might have to go out the roundabout way. You might have to develop a product that someone will want to buy, or a service that someone will want to buy, the money that you make from that, buy your own product.
Terracing or leveraging or whatever you want to call it. Next question, sir.
Yes. I don't know if McDonnell Douglas has an office for private affairs, if you want to call it as such, but like a major corporation like Motorola with their Iridium project, other projects that are coming online now, have they addressed or have they contacted, in fact, McDonnell Douglas directly to look at if your series of test flights do take place? Is there, in fact, some discussion going on? Obviously, you look at Boeing or McDonnell Douglas when they're developing a DC-11 or a 777 out of their own funding, knowing that they have confirmed orders, will go into the development of a $4 or $5 billion aircraft. Have you seen out of McDonnell Douglas any of these people like, I don't know, Motorola, who has shopped all over the world for their Iridium launchers, etc.? Have you seen any kind of trickle in of commercial interest as far as looking at developing commercially, partially funding a follow-on vehicle? I guess Bill would.
Yeah, well, the interest has been there in terms of, if that were flying today, we'd sure be on it, because it meets their desires for low-cost access, and equally, and maybe even more importantly, it meets their desires to be able to logistically support the asset once they get it in space. And start getting more complex network like Iridium and others that are following that, they just simply cannot afford outage for any periods of time at all, because we have a lot of angry customers. And so responsiveness is as major a driver as its cost. So the answer is there's that type of interest been expressed in the using for it, and but they tend to look at it more as a service to be provided rather than as a new venture for investment.
Tom, were you going to answer for that, or so you're nodding?
No, I was just making the observation, we just don't have any TWAs in the airline that we build these vehicles. There is absent as I mentioned earlier, it comes and goes, whatever, for the arrangement providers.
Am I calling? Okay, go ahead. I'm going to be calling on people who have not asked a question. So if you've asked a question,
This is kind of a regression back to the space station. I've heard over the course of the redesigns, the capabilities of the space station keeps getting cut back to the point now where a lot of the future expansion capabilities of the system have been eliminated completely from the space station. And it seems like they did the same thing when they designed the space shuttle. They said it's too expensive, redesign it, and they kept cutting it back to the point where they finally got something. They said, okay, now you can build it. And the upfront costs were reduced, but the long-term maintenance was horrendous, which is what we have now. Does it make any sense to have them go back and redesign the space station one more time to add back in some of that stuff that they took out that's really going to kill us in the long run?
why don't we'll deal with that on a conceptual level that's not space station related. If anybody wants to take
Yeah,
I guess what I'm asking is,
Your point's
does it
valid.
make sense to go and get the space station up in space no matter what it is, just to get it up there? Or does it make sense to go back and add some things back in that were eliminated because we don't want to repeat what we did with the space shuttle?
Well, yeah, I'll put on another hat here for 1 second. I'm on a subgroup looking at operations and utilization of the space station for NASA. So again, I speak for myself, but we just had some meetings, and the my feeling, is that if we can have a space station up there that has a significantly greater capability than Mir, then yes, it makes sense to do it. If you end up getting to basically the same capabilities as something we have, which is the Russian Mir station, then it's much harder to justify. Why don't we just go rent space from them? They have cut back a lot of the capabilities that would be really nice to have. I've got some gut feelings as both an engineer and somebody who's flown up there that the way it's coming out today, if they still keep it, which is the basic guidelines of 4 people, 30 to 40 kilowatts of power for the users, 40 racks or so of laboratory space. Those are all good things. There are some areas of the data system that aren't as good as you'd like it to have. You'd like to have a completely separate set of systems software and a completely separate payload and experiment software so that you can do anything you want with the payload and not worry about the interaction between the systems. Those things have kind of gone away.
What about the capability of like expanding the power capabilities? Not having, just having the connectors.
Yeah,
we don't need to get
that's a good one. I don't know the answer to that one, but I mean, I think it makes sense to have those kinds of scars in there. The engineers that are doing it hopefully have that in the back of their mind, but they're under serious financial pressure to keep the cost down.
Very quick observation. Problem on the space station is nothing. Nothing to do with engineering. It's hanging on by its fingernails. So all of the things that you're interested in, go out and have a couple of martinis in the back in 10 years. Revisit it. George Brown said it's a political, not an engineering matter. The President of the United States at some point is going to have to get up and go his phone. I'm screwed no matter what. If I say cancel it, then all the momentum we built up for 30 years sharply arrested, because the next day people will ask about the shuttle and so on. And you're down a slippery slope, God knows what. On the other hand, he's going to stand up with all the other things he has to deal with and say, what this country really is a space station that will give us 2 scientists in orbit, cost him $3 billion. What he's got to do is to adjust all of his antennae and ask, how am I going to deal with that baggage? So it completes. There's nothing to do with it.
Let me put one more comment on the value, which is, again, getting back to the question of basic space infrastructure, which I think space station is, in the same nature that the wind tunnels, that the old NACA built, is what our aircraft industry grew up on and was able to be a competitor worldwide and a strong competitor worldwide because of basic infrastructure that we invested in. Not glamorous. We'll look at a wind tunnel and Congress would probably have a hard time passing that today. But if we are going to live, work, develop space, then there are some basic facilities that you should think about developing that do give us a competitive, as a nation, a competitive capability to do that.
Yeah, I wanted to add something too.
It'd be great if this were just about cats.
Well, no, I think Bill's absolutely right that what we need here is a combination of some federally funded infrastructure like the station, but NASA really ought to be going off towards new technology. I mean, right now a station is in the sense that it's such a big set of infrastructure that it probably needs to be federally funded initially. But they should be off doing NASP and things that are cutting edge of technology, or not worrying about, well, let's see, what's the cheapest way to get 5, 10, 15, 20 people into orbit. And NASA doesn't go out and design and build an airline. If they want to send their people to a meeting, they go buy a bunch of tickets on the airlines. And my feeling is that they need to be judiciously applied federal funds to do things like the infrastructure of the station, but then open it up for commercial companies to do the supply, the resupply, maybe even the operations of it.
A very quick fairy tale. It's 10 years ago. Jim Beggs makes a phone call, and he's talking to Tip O'Neill, Speaker of the House. He says, Mr. O'Neill, can I call upon you for your support for a space station? Well, what's it going to cost? About $100 million to $1 billion. Well, let me tell you about a space. That's all right, Mr. Beggs. You're the president's administrator. That's what you want. He backs you. You got it. A week goes by. He makes another call. Mr. O'Neill, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. Our people came in and told me that it really is not going to be $100 million. It's going to be maybe $5 or $6 million. Gee, Mr. Beggs, would you write me a letter and tell me what a space station really is so I can tell people about it and, you know, explain this? 2 months go by. He makes the final call. Mr. O'Neill, all the contract people come in, all our accountants come in. And I must correct the previous number. Even the GAO agrees with me, it's going to cost $40 billion. Mr. O'Neill? Mr. O'Neill? Look, you know, we make federal projects out of the understanding of it. It's not that difficult a situation to understand. We don't need science and engineers at present. That's the problem. It's a question of that.
I would, let's try and stay away from the space station. I would conclude this by saying, however, that, oh, you're going to say that too. You say it. No, go ahead, Peter, and I'll
I made the point earlier, I made the point last night. There is space station or shuttle are perfect examples of the wrong way to do a program. And I submit that what SDIO and DCX have done is the correct way to do a program. And let me explain why. There's a fundamental impedance mismatch, to use one of Tom's terms, between the way our federal government runs our budget and the way the timelines of space programs. Our federal budget operates on an annual basis. Every year we ask the question, is this worth continuing? And maybe every 2 years we ask the question. So we got something that's looked at every year and every 2 years, and space station and shuttle, have something that occurs on a 10-year scale, where you've got an outcome on a 10-year scale. There is a complete mismatch. We have to do one of two things. Either one, we change the way our federal government works R&D dollars, so that every decade you set aside $1 trillion to do research. And you don't come back and ask questions again. So in 1990, you say we're going to do Super Collider and Space Station and DCY, we're going to put $1 trillion and make those things happen. And the year 2000, if a new project comes on in 1993, you say, hey, 2000, come back in year 2000 and propose it. And that 10 years, you do those things, and the funding is there continuously. So you change the federal budget. It's probably kind of hard. Second option you do is you change the scale of your space programs. And you do things in 1 year and 2 year cycles. And that's, Colonel Ward's philosophy and Jess Sponsor's philosophy, and it's worked. And so, gotta ask the question, if I ever hear, or you guys ever hear of a program again that's got a deliverable in 8 or 9 or 10 years cycle, please go out and shoot the dog.
I want to refer back to the thing I mentioned at the very beginning, the Frontier Enabling Test. If you want to apply it to the discussion we just had on space stations, the one Tom talked about, where you had a phase 2 with 100 people, a space station program, and in this case it is a program, yeah, we're so sexy. All of us used to work. If you have that kind of a space station program, that would meet our Frontier Enabling Test. Because there would be, you could see the path leading to the opening of the frontier to the American people. Dr. Lichtenberg's variation on that. Current space station, but everything, all the transportation, everything is supplied by private suppliers. Suddenly, the space station then does become, in a way, a frontier enabling technology, because it's enabling companies to begin getting revenue streams so they can begin taking off on their own. So kind of keep that idea in mind here. I have somebody, there you are, sir.
Yeah, I think we're kind of mixing up a lot of this here to some degree. One thing is a government whose mandate is to govern and not to make money to do business. Another thing is to go out and make business out of the space activities. To some degree, if we can, that's why we did the conclusion to the word program, because the fact the government needs a program. The program is a plan here. You make a plan to see if you can implement it and finance it eventually. Then you go out to the private sector and what Peter is doing to the chart equals phenomenal. And that's exactly what's happening. idea. And that's the private sector that comes and kicks in and does it. I think there's a big fracture here between the private sector, which maybe we represent here to some degree. It comes up and says to the government, we can help by doing such and such, and we want the government to retain its capability with the NASA functions to provide education, like the examples here, we talk about primarily R&D reasons, so that the entire plant is not affected. The government maintains its vision, long-term vision, without being bogged down by proper financial considerations. Now maybe the question for Peter would be, how can you tie up better and more those financial schemes into the current government programs, like the school programs, which are very valid, and represents a continuity and support of the private sector of the government, and how we as private sector can really be a much more cohesive group. I mean, 100 years ago, I have really had time, we're talking about frontier here, but I had time thinking 100 years ago, and I'm not even American in the sense of what I can tell, that people sitting before jumping in a wagon, people sitting in a Hilton hotel room, deciding how we're going to go over the Rockies and conquer the West. I mean, they just jump on the wagon and they did.
Right. We need the wagons. One thing to keep in mind too is for the first time in 12 years, we do have a government in place that doesn't flip out at the word subsidies or industrial policy. That could be quite useful. I think there is, and I think several of the speakers have pointed out, that there is a place for that sort of assistance, subsidization, that type of thing, of this type of industry as it gets started, because of the long lead times involved, because of the large financial investments in the front that are required. And that's the kind of modeling I think we're getting out of the DCH program for the SSDL. So there is a place for government in this. There's definitely a place for NASA, facilities, etc. Sir, all right.
Yeah, this is to Tom Rodgers. Since SDI is so incredibly unpopular right now politically, how does SSTO look politically, not as a value thing, but politically?
What is it? Yes?
SSTO, how does it look politically, not as a value thing, but politically?
Not exactly a democratic thing.
My own sense is that over the past year, the people working on it pretty well given life itself alone to the SSTO universe.
Yeah, but you said
up if you put your mind to it. But I think that there's a good chance that it's got a life and a momentum of its own.
You said earlier that you didn't think you could see the government funding another rocket program, but you think
I'm
that
not talking the tens of millions of dollars, what I've already been on about that. When you start talking about tens of billions of dollars or something like that, to get, suppose you're talking about a vehicle to have the desirable operational capability of the shuttle fleet. You know, that's a non-trivial amount of money, and I just find it personally difficult to imagine that much money coming out of the federal government for some time.
Okay, we're going to do a couple more questions and we're going to wrap it up here. By the aisle back there.
Yes, to get back to cheap access to space, I was wondering if any of the speakers know anything about the status of some of the electromagnetic launch technology or rail guns or gas guns. Where that stands?
We had a great briefing recently at the Space Studies Institute conference, which is one I recommend people attend who are into the technology research side of things, on the gas gun. Yeah. Well, there's a great briefing on that. The gas gun is apparently on track. They're going to scale it up very soon and do some more tests. And it is one of those wonderful cases where you can build a small one and the same technology basically apply as you scale up and up and up and up. And they're very optimistic about it. The other nice thing about the gas gun is that it's such a low cost that the downside is, of course, you have to have something that's basically as solid as a brick when you start. You get all the gel.
Let me just comment on that. It's launch technologies, again, are only half the question. And the problem with gas guns or rail guns are you can get, sure, pennies to orbit, but the only thing you can afford to launch are diamonds. The cost of the satellites will go up a factor of 10. You bring the launch cost down a factor of 10, and you're still stuck with the same financial problem. Right now, the way we build satellites is to try and make them as low cost as possible. And you've got to match both the satellite technology and the launch vehicle technology and minimize both to get where we want to go. There's going to be a small class of payloads that benefit, but the class of payloads all of us want, meaning ourselves.
But you need a lot of infrastructure up there in order to support us, which is what that could be useful for.
Okay, one last question, then we're going to have to close it up for the launch.
My question is for Peter. Are you aware of the chicken and egg nature of spacecraft and launch vehicles?
Absolutely.
Spacecraft cost a lot because they go up, so they have to be reliable, get tested a lot, and so forth. And launch vehicles, because they put up that precious thing, they have to test them a lot. So when you cut the payload, when you cut the launch vehicles cost by 10 to 1, you're going to cut the payload cost by a lot. That's going to affect your.
It's called the vicious cycle.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay,
Thank you. 10 seconds.
Go ahead.
One final word about the Indians. I have a close professional acquaintance with American Indians. Former fighter pilot in the Navy, first Indian MBA out of Harvard. One night I was talking about a very well-known federal establishment official in England. I said, you know, she's gotten to the point where they're doing things that are not just dumb, they're getting dangerous to the country. What do you do about it? She said, 3 things. First, very persuasively, or maybe just by waiting enough time, get them off the horses. Then, you scatter the horses. Then, you pick them off one at a time.
On that note, I want to hold it just a moment before we finish, Tom. There's two courses of action I would recommend to people here, first of all. Those of you who have the ability, capability, desire, or imagination, go out and start a company and try and make something happen. Right? Most of you are going to fail. 1 or 2 of you are going to be back here, sitting up here looking for a successful rocket or product in a few years. The second thing, for those of you who are more on the working on the government side of things, and Tom basically set me up for that, is we're working on a project in the foundation, we'll do this real quickly, called the Declaration for Cheap Access to Space. The idea is to basically break each one of the demographic groups in the space community that have been going after each other's throats for so many years down, and get them each one individually in their own independent declaration to agree that cheap access to space is what they feel the national priority should be. It doesn't say whether the government should do it or private should do it, but at least to get that mindset going out there in that home of all wisdom and light, as Tom refers to it in Washington, that cheap access to space is a priority. The idea would be we have one version for astronomers, one for astronauts or Americans who have flown in space, space riders, you name it, we'll go after them. The idea then is, as these declarations are finished, they begin trickling into Washington one at a time. Here comes one from the astronomers. Here comes one from the humans in space crowd, and somebody in the White House eventually, oh my God, they agree on this. Eventually, hopefully, we can get somebody to go, look, there's beginning to be a consensus. Because as you know, there's a survey that's going on out there that some of the aerospace companies want to go through that, they're going to go out and find out who their customers are. I guarantee the one thing they won't ask, the one crowd they will not ask, is the American people as to what they want to do. So we want to take all these different groups out there that represent different aspects and aspirations of those people, get them to agree on something. I'm going to read it to you real quick. Basically, the general version goes, we, the undersigned American citizens, as taxpaying contributors to this nation's efforts in space, understand the space frontier is a vital and necessary part of our future and that of the human race. We recognize that all current and future space planning, whether for scientific, industrial, or national goals, will continue to be severely limited by the extreme high costs of entering the space environment. Thus, we hereby declare that encouraging and assisting in the development of technologies and systems which provide cheap, regular, and reliable access to space as soon as possible should be the highest priority for this nation's space program. This sets up the question, this sets up the discussion. SSTO, cheap access to space, then can provide the answer, because the question isn't being asked in Washington. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for attending. I know you were expecting hardware. That ain't what it's about. I hope you got that message. Go out and do something and have a great conference.